and we look at the conviction or lack thereof in the Muslim community, a lot of that can be attributed to liberalism when it comes to sexuality and sexual norms. And permissible is if the two parties consent. So what's the god of liberalism? The god of liberalism is the human self. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasul. So over the past month or so, I've been lecturing at a couple of different venues on the topic of liberalism. And I've been sharing my thoughts on liberalism, trying to educate the Muslim community on liberalism and really the dangers of liberalism and how we can critique it. And I think it's important that we critique it and also do so from a way that's intellectually compelling, but also true to our principles as Muslims. So having that in mind, I think, is really important. And when I present on this topic, the way that I start is by saying that when we look at the Muslim world today, and we look at the conviction or lack thereof in the Muslim community, a lot of that can be attributed to liberalism. And the way that I justify this in terms of the Quran is that Allah says that He hasn't made any man with two hearts within him, meaning that you can't be faithful to two separate faiths, deens at the same time. And I do consider liberalism as a deen, as a complete religion and faith, even though it's not considered to be such, but we can understand it in that way. And the other thing that is important to clarify is that I write a lot about liberalism and I critique it, and sometimes people have the mistaken understanding that I'm critiquing political liberalism in the sense of like the Democratic Party in the US. And they think I just have a bone to pick with Democrats. In reality, I'm critiquing philosophical liberalism. And the way to think about philosophical liberalism is as an umbrella, that underneath, within that umbrella, there are other ideologies, smaller ideologies that are considered liberal in their intellectual orientation, even though they might not be considered as such. So as far as political liberalism is concerned, you have Democrats and Republicans, but they're essentially liberals in the philosophical sense. You also have other ideologies like capitalism, communism, socialism, fascism even. These are all under the umbrella of philosophical liberalism. And so what is philosophical liberalism, and why do I consider it to be a religion? So just like any religion, philosophical liberalism has values, beliefs about what is right or wrong. Specifically, anything that is seen as maximizing human freedom, maximizing human liberty, that's considered to be good, and anything that detracts from human liberty, human freedom, that's seen as an evil and a negative. And that's what it boils down to. And when you look at all of these different Western political movements and trace their intellectual history, they all are liberal in the sense that they're all trying to achieve and bring about this human liberty and freedom. Everything from socialism, communism, fascism even, and even political liberalism that we see in the modern context in America as well as in Europe. So again, like Donald Trump or Republicans would be considered philosophical liberals. And you can see that in their language. You can see that they'll talk about, they'll use the vocabulary of liberalism. They'll talk about freedom and maximizing individual rights. And so these different ideologies will have different ways that they propose to maximize liberty and freedom and equality and human rights. But they're all aiming for the same goal and the same ends. So that's how I define philosophical liberalism. And so how is that a deen? How is that a religion? Well, like I said, you have the values and the beliefs that liberalism has, just like any other religion. You also have books. So just like the Quran, you have the Bible. Liberals also have their defining foundational texts. You have the canon, the liberal canon. So things like the Declaration of Independence, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations put out in the 20th century. You have things like the US Constitution, the Magna Carta. These are seen as foundational liberal documents, and they're treated almost with this sacredness that believers treat their holy texts. And so there are a lot of parallels that you can make there that I would argue. And you know, you also have figures, prophets, you could even say, if you to continue the analogy. You have figures like John Milton, Thomas Jefferson, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, David Hume to a certain extent. So you have all of these figures historically who are writing about liberalism. And then you also have a god. So what's the god of liberalism? If liberalism is a religion, what would be considered the god of that? And I think that really the god of liberalism is the human self, you yourself. When you look at liberal language and liberal philosophy, this is an underlying theme, is that ultimately it all goes back to the self. And so even things like when it comes to sexuality and sexual norms, we often hear liberals say that as long as two individuals consent to a specific action, then it's morally right, or that's all that's required for an action, a sexual activity, to me, morally acceptable and permissible is if the two parties consent. So what does that mean is that as long as you yourself agree to a certain activity or an action, then it's okay just by that. So that's, again, you decide. You're the one who decides what is acceptable or not, as opposed to God or something else. And then also things like the Golden Rule. So the Golden Rule is something that's found in different forms throughout liberal philosophy, classically and even in the present day. And what is the Golden Rule is treat others as you wish to be treated. So if you think about it, it's treat others as you wish to be treated. So your own moral orientation, your own interests, and what you view as right and wrong and beneficial, you yourself, then that is the criterion for what is in fact proper or correct action. And so again, it's very self-centered, it's very nafsi. And then you can see the same kind of idea as the Golden Rule, and this is something academics have pointed out. You can see the same thing. So you can see within liberal philosophy these different manifestations of the Golden Rule, and it's coming from liberal ideology. And they are dangerous, and they are problematic, and we should be able to critique that, and there are different ways to do that. I also, the good news is that academics, in the academic sphere, there have been a lot of critiques of liberalism, and people are not really aware of what those critiques are. So I think we need to catch up. We need to bring in that material. Jazakallah khair for your attention and your time, and I'll talk to you again soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.